Welcome to the Renaissance Press reading session. We'd like to thank the Association of English Language Publishers of Quebec for putting together this awesome festival and for having us as part of their program. We would like to warn you that some of the passages you will hear today deal with themes of horror, police, deadly illness, homophobia, ableism, sexism, sexual harassment, mental illness, poverty, and imprisonment. Please listen with caution and care. And now for the readings. Death by Association by Madona Skaff-Koren.
Hi, my name is Madona Skaff-Koren, and I'll be reading from the opening chapter of Death by Association, which is a sequel to Journey of 1,000 Steps. Just give you a quick background of the story so far. Naya had suffered a serious MS attack during the Ottawa Marathon in the spring. It's the fall now, and despite daily workouts, she's frustrated by her stalled progress, which left little patience when Larson Rask rolled his wheelchair into her gym and headed towards her. As usual, he's full of prying questions, reminding her that marathons were now a thing of the past. "Can I ask you," Larson began, "how did you manage to adjust from being so active to living with limited mobility?" She turned in the leg press seat to fully face him and tell him to get lost, to leave her alone, to stop peeling back Band-Aids from barely healed emotions. But when she looked him straight in the face, her planned response failed. He wasn't being nosy or gossipy. He sincerely needed to know, and for the first time she actually saw him. He looked like an athlete. Broad, muscular shoulders weren't uncommon in someone who used a manual wheelchair, but Larson's legs were still muscular. Very obvious, even though he wore track pants. Since leg muscles hadn't had time to atrophy, whatever had put him in that chair had happened recently. The guy was probably just trying to figure out how to cope and adjust to his new life. She held on to the leg press to help pull herself up and stepped closer. "I'm sorry if I've been a bit short with you. Sometimes it's hard," and she stopped and asked instead, "What happened to put you in that chair?" It's kind of complicated." "That's okay. She broke off when she saw a man in a bulky windbreaker enter the gym. He was talking on his cell phone. Without putting it down, he went to the reception desk and spoke to the young woman, Carly. Shaking her head at the rudeness of not putting down the cell to talk to the receptionist, Naya returned her attention to Larson. "I was saying, you can talk about it when you feel ready." She gave him a sincere smile of encouragement. "Look, it took me a while before I accepted things and would actually leave my house." "That's understandable if you had trouble moving around." "No," she laughed, realizing how silly it sounded now. "I was too embarrassed to let people see me using a walker." Over Larson's right shoulder in the far corner, she noticed a small commotion by the free weights where 91-year-old Mrs. Fieldkirk was working out. Carly was involved in an animated discussion that included a lot of arm-waving and gesturing from the older lady. The argument was ended by a very dramatic and audible shoo from Mrs. Fieldkirk, who then picked up an impressive 20-pound weight and continued her bicep curls. The reception looked back at the man in the windbreaker, still on his phone. He nodded. Carly gave Naya a strange, indecipherable look, then returned quickly to the front. And that's when Naya noticed that all the other clients were huddled behind the desk. Puzzled for a split second, she soon felt an overwhelming sense of dread. She could hear Larson's voice as though coming through a lawn tunnel and tuned back in. "I know that it's harder than you let on, to cope, I mean, and also," he stopped. "Are you okay? Do you need to sit down?" She was about to say that something strange was going on when several things happened at once, all taking barely a few seconds, but she caught everything as though watching a movie on slow frame advance. The bulky jacket man put the cell in his pocket. He reached inside his jacket as he glanced at the door. He pulled out a gun. The door burst open. 6 policemen wearing bulletproof vests stormed in, shouting orders simultaneously. Hands in the air, don't move, hands up. Heart-pounding Nye frantically scanned the room for the threat they were responding to. Within seconds, they had swarmed Larson, guns leveled at him. One cop accidentally bumped her. Off balance, she started to fall in horrific slow motion. The same cop steadied her with one hand, but somehow kept his gun aimed at Larson. 2 cops yanked Larson out of his wheelchair, threw him to the floor, frisked and handcuffed his hands behind his back. Shocked cries from everyone behind the desk masked Naya's own yell. Before anyone could react further, a harsh silence overtook the room. The police pulled Larson to his feet. He stood, looked at Naya with an odd mix of emotions she couldn't understand. Pleading, regret. Her heart skipped a beat when his armed escort marched him out of the exit on 2 very sturdy, very healthy legs. Naya was sure her heart stopped altogether when one of the officers announced, "Larson Rask, you're under arrest for 3 counts of murder." Thank you very much for listening.
A Refuge of Tales by Lynne Sargent.
Hi there, my name is Lynne Sargent, and I'm here to read for you from my collection, A Refuge of Tales. It's a collection of poetry out from Renaissance Press. Repeat. There are 2 ways of making miss. For the first, kiss a sunset. Feel its color on your lips. Hold your lover's hand. Repeat. The second, tell a lie to a child. Watch them build it into truth. Tell it again and believe. Oysters. I am the otter at the bar, outsourcing my cleverness with rocks to the waitress, sucking back the sea that tastes like my mother. She too had 2 skins, 2 worlds like 2 genders. One might think it double the choice, double the chance, double the love. But when has opportunity ever overruled the harshness of fear, the desire to control? They locked her other skin in a box, put it somewhere she never found. She lived a half-life already buried. I slurp another oyster. They slip down like sorrow, salty sustenance in the remembering, in the hope that tomorrow I will have choices that she did not. That I will crack my meat skin open and no one will care what is inside. That it will taste like home, like not having to choose the water or the land, the azure blue or sunset pink. That a lover might not ask which I am before they swallow me. Hamilton Harbor. The fires at the edge of the water tempt drowning men to stay. The harbor has sunk 1,000 dreams, steel bent into art, into inequity. The pathways crumble, giving way to communities of animalistic fae, reminding us that even in our urban jungle, the lake is wild and can flood our hopes, our indulgences, leaving us all beggars on half-submerged benches. A clock ticks. A clock ticks. A man dies. A child, swollen-bellied, hungers. The chatter remains, coming not with ease but routine. The coffee shop is closed this week, yet we still find ways to twitch, feel our goals with excuses, our knuckles with turmoil, lick, thumb, flip. Give your words to the birds instead of your boss. They will listen, give you hope and stitch it into your mother's dress. Leave the lights up past the season. Call them fae. Call them. Listen as the clock winds down. The chatter dies. Do not be afraid to answer.
Love and Lemonade by Jamieson Wolf.
Hello everyone, my name is Jamieson Wolf and I'm the author of Love and Lemonade. It's the third book in the Lemonade trilogy. It also recently won the Best GLBTQ Plus Book of 2019. So I'll be reading chapter 1 from the book. I hope you enjoy it. Let me just get there. There we go. Alright, chapter 1. Oh, and you might hear my cat in the background. Anakin likes to talk a lot. But, okay, chapter 1. I can explain, Curtis said. Devin stood there, holding the flowers he had meant to leave for Curtis's birthday. They were supposed to be a surprise, but Devin was the one who was in shock. Curtis stood there, looking like someone else entirely, like another person. Devin shook his head, closed his eyes, and said a little internal prayer. Then he opened them again. Curtis, if it was indeed him, was wearing a tight floor-length ball gown in a brilliant pink color. He had a blonde wig on that matched his natural hair color, and it was done up in a large updo. A tiara blinked from atop his head. He was holding a purse that sparkled with iridescent rhinestones, and his feet were clad in high-heeled shoes in white leather that were covered in more rhinestones. He had makeup on, and makeup on his eyelids that were marked in a sparkling pink powder, and his eyelashes were long and voluminous. He had another sparkly stone on his left cheek that looked like a beauty mark made of diamonds. In short, Curtis sparkled. Curtis looked shocked to see Devin. He actually jumped a little. "Hey, handsome, I didn't expect you until later this evening. What are you doing here?" Devin tried to play it cool. "What, a man can't bring his woman flowers for her birthday?" Curtis let out a laugh, and the sound calmed Devin down a bit. "Oh, you silly man, I'm still the guy underneath this getup. You don't look like one now. How did you get boobs?" "Believe it or not, plastic bags and hair gel, they make the most realistic breasts. A lot of drag queens use sand and balloons, but I find those too firm." "Oh," Devin said. The silence between them stretched on for too long. Devin looked at Curtis and still saw the man he loved, the man he adored, only he was wearing a dress. After a few moments of silence, Curtis spoke again. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry you found out this way." Shrugging, Devin said, "I just wanted to celebrate your birthday. I had all these things planned, surprises and stuff I wanted to do for you." "We can still do them. What did you have in mind?" Instead of answering Curtis's question, Devin asked, "How long have you been doing this?" "For a while now, a few years." There was more silence, while Devin tried to find a response. Finally he spoke. "A few years." "Sure, my drag is Carlotta Men. You may have seen me dressed up and performing in a few of the bars." The name did ring a bell. "You did that number where you sang, 'These boots were made for walking,' and actually walked on men's backs, right?" "Oh, you saw that one. I was really happy with that. Don't worry, all the steps were strategically placed. No one actually got hurt." "Glad to hear it," Devin said. More silence filled the room. Curtis spoke again. "Look, Devin, I'm sorry you had to find out this way." "I'm sorry, too." "Are you mad because I'm a drag queen?" Devin tried to keep the hurt out of his voice. "I'm hurt because you didn't tell me." He set the flowers down on the hallway table. "Happy birthday, Curtis." Stepping out into the hallway, Devin closed the door. He placed his hand upon the wood and imagined Curtis doing the same. He was about to turn away when he heard the click of high heels on hard wood. The door was thrown open, and Curtis was standing there looking like a woman. "Would you at least come to my birthday drag show? I'm performing a number and I'm dedicating it to you." Devin looked at this creature, this woman, and smiled. "Just try and stop me," he said, and then he walked away from Curtis, leaving his heart behind. So, I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to know more, gotta read the book. Anyway, thanks for having me, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Bye.
Our story, Coming Out in the Time of HIV and AIDS, by Robert Hamilton.
June 20, 1993. I woke up early this morning, had a cup of tea, and eventually got ready to walk over to Joe's place. I called first to let him know I was on my way. I had put all negative thoughts about seeing Joe out of my mind. However, on arrival, I approached his apartment building with much trepidation. I had not given any thought to how uncomfortable this might be for Joe or me, or how difficult it might be for him to open his door and allow me in. I thought I would just be happy to see him, and he would be just as happy to see me. I buzzed Joe's suite. It took a bit of time for him to answer. I said, "Hi, it's me." In a weak voice, he said, "Come on up," and buzzed me in. Stepping out of the elevator, knocking on his door, and waiting Joe to answer was distressing. Mickey and Ray were right. Joe's appearance was shocking. He was a rack of bones wrapped in his burgundy terry cloth housecoat. Joe said, "Scary, eh?" I said, "No, but thin and sickly looking, yes." We moved on to his balcony with its $1,000,000 view. It was a nice enough day. Joe sat with his face to the wind. He says the wind helps him breathe more easily. He said he hadn't heard from two close friends in the past few months and was very hurt by it. This week he was questioning his worth as a person while on this earth. We talked about it and ended up laughing. He joked at least he can proudly say as a man he got to wear some really pretty dresses. In the end we agreed that he should be proud. I teared up when he was telling me about his visit with his mom. He smoked pot in front of her. He said it felt odd at first smoking in front of her, but she understood it helped with his pain and appetite. He asked her to smoke pot with him, but she wouldn't. He told his mother what she can do for him is to not let the family refer to him as that fruit that died from that gay disease. He wants her to tell them that he is her gay son who died from AIDS, and it's not a gay disease. He suggested his mother confide in those close to her so she has support when he passes. She said she had already done so. Joe doesn't want to go home for a visit because he's looking too thin and sickly. He would rather they remember him the way he was. The only medication he's taking is 1 pill for the herpes sores that line his stomach and morphine for the pain. Before leaving, Joe wanted me to walk with him the few blocks over to Main Street so he can go to the bank. He was slow-moving and unsteady on his feet. He did his best to hide his frailty. While at the bank, I watched him snap at someone who was staring at him. He hated being stared at. After the bank, we started walking back towards his apartment. We moved slow but steady, and halfway there, Joe became irritated with himself. He had wanted to stop in at the 7-Eleven to buy popsicle. The morphine gives him serious dry mouth, and popsicles provide relief. Joe waited on the sidewalk while I hurried back to the 7-Eleven. When I returned, I handed the popsicle over to Joe and immediately knew it was a dumb move on my part. I should have first broken the popsicle in two. Now that Joe had the popsicle, there was no way in hell he was giving it back to me. It was his opportunity to prove to me that he was stronger than he appeared and quite capable of breaking the damn popsicle in half. I had no choice but to stand back and watch. Joe put all his strength into breaking that fucking popsicle in two, but couldn't. The popsicle ended up breaking into several pieces and fell onto the ground, except for one small piece that remained on the one stick. Joe stood so vulnerable before me, and in that moment I sensed he absolutely hated me. Watching Joe with the frozen popsicle was a flashback moment for me. I was there before with Roger, but instead of a popsicle, it was a child's party balloon. Roger was sick, and I was at his place decorating the house and blowing up balloons for his 40th birthday. Roger sat at the kitchen table watching and decided he would help by blowing up a few balloons. I can still see Roger sitting at the end of the kitchen table, trying with all his might to blow up a balloon. He didn't have the lung power. Man versus kid's party balloon, and kid's party balloon won. It confirmed to Roger how sick he was. He started crying and he became really angry. Here I am, a grown man, and I can't even blow up a fucking kid's balloon. It was a sad and haunting memory, similar to watching Joe wrestle with the frozen popsicle. June 27, 1993. One of our first nice days of summer. We smoked pot, ate lunch at Wendy's, and took baby out for a spin with the soft top down. We drove towards the UBC endowment lands and down into the Southlands. Always a beautiful scenic drive. While stopped at a red light and waiting for it to change, I looked over at Joe sitting in the passenger seat with his face to the wind. And in that moment, I didn't see HIV or AIDS or sickness. All I saw was my good friend Joe. He saw me looking at him and he asked, "What?" I told him I was seeing him for the first time and not his sickness, and beyond the condition his condition was in, it was still just him. He smiled. "That's right," he said. "It's just little old me, Stick Boy Joe." He often called himself that. Knowing I saw him and not the disease reassured Joe. In that moment, it felt like any unease between us evaporated, and we were back to being our usual selves. Then the stoplight turned green. We continued on our drive, with Joe keeping his head up and his face to the breeze.
Life After REDBY by Kaitlin Caul.
Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin. Welcome to my first chapter reading from Life After REDBY. Life After REDBY is my first published novel. It came out from Renaissance Press in 2017. This is a urban horror thriller which follows the life of Cass. She is a soldier who gets trapped in a zombie testing ground town known as REDBY, and the book just follows her first year of life experiences in that town. So we're going to dive right into the first chapter. I will warn you in advance, it is a relatively short chapter, but hopefully it gives you an appetite for zombies. Chapter 1, Oak Ridge Mental Hospital, Texas, August 22nd, 2032. Once upon a time, there was a little town called REDBY that nobody cared about. Some evil pricks from Mesa Corporation built giant walls around the town, filled it with zombies, then sat around and watched the little people run and scream and die. We lived that way for 10 years, screaming and dying and starting all over again. Being immortal kind of sucks like that. Then my friend made a cure, we got out, REDBY burned to the ground, and all Mesa collapsed. That part all happened a little fast. Then I went nuts, and the rest of the world went back to being full of sunshine and rainbows and blissful ignorance. The end. On the inside of the glossy green journal, neatly typed out on a name tag, read my name and current residence, Cassandra Isabella Sarah Torres, resident of Oak Ridge Mental Hospital. The doctor gave me the journal with my name tag already attached. I guess he figured I wouldn't remember my own name if I didn't see it every day. Some days he wasn't far off. Inside the journal, filling exactly half a page, scrawled the details Dr. Brown had asked me for. A quick summary of all the shit that had happened over the 10 years I'd spent trapped in REDBY, also known as Zombie Hell. I glossed over the part about how, a few days after getting out, I decided the free life wasn't my thing and opted to kill a guy. Insanity plea, lots of media attention, a year of court appearances that played out more like a reality fucking TV show, and suddenly I'm the newest resident of the biggest, baddest, max security nut house in the United States. Welcome to Oak Ridge Mental Hospital. Would you like the blue pills or the red pills? Setting the journal on the bed, still open to the first page, I shifted around to get comfortable. The mattress squeaked to protest, and the cold stone of the wall pressed against my spine. There would be no getting comfortable in this room, and no escape from the reflection in the door's window. Most of the details bled out beneath the hall's light, save for the ugly dark lines stretched across my skin like puckered, jagged cobwebs. Mementos of all my failures. A shadow passed through my reflection, the guard making his rounds. Inside of half an hour, the pill cart would be at my door. The nurse would smile and make small talk, waiting for me to finish taking my meds. She'd ask to see my mouth to make sure I'd swallow them. Then she'd tell me how cooperative I was, not like the other patients, and leave. Same shit and same day for all I knew. I stopped caring about the days of the week years ago. Except for that damn journal. I kept a journal back in REDBY to report on movement patterns and supply drops. Helped me keep track of important shit like how much longer we could stay alive. It wasn't my style to write down my feelings and all that mushy emotional stuff. Just a summary, the doc had said. It doesn't have to be detailed. Just write down as much or as little as you feel you need to regarding what happened in REDBY. Right, easy. I did that. On to the next exercise. Except it wasn't good enough. I never did anything half-assed. Wait, that was a lie. I did a lot of things half-assed. Just not when it came to important things, like REDBY. Maybe it was the old military training kicking in, telling me to make good report. Or maybe it was just the damn shrink knowing I wouldn't be able to leave REDBY as a footnote in my life. It didn't matter why. I tore out the first page, crumpled it up, and threw it into the far corner. Next, I picked up the pen, growled something unkind regarding the doc under my breath, and started writing. They say when you die, you see a light at the end of a tunnel. I've died plenty, and I can promise you, there is no light. I don't mean mostly dead either. I mean face ripped off, gut spilling out, all dead. It sucks at first, but you get used to it. In REDBY, you had no choice. You either learn to live with cursed immortality, or you crawl into a corner and give up. I never give up. I guess that's why I'm here. The hunter in me never died, even if my body did. My name is Cassandra Isabella Sarah Torres. I am 32 years old this month. At 18 years old, I joined the military. At 21 years old, I became a captive of REDBY, Nevada, otherwise known as Zombie Hell. For 10 years, I lived in a constant state of life, death, and undeath. And if there's one thing I learned through all those years, it's this. Dying hurts. Every time.
To Pluck a Crow, Death Stalks the House of Herbert by Sue Taylor-Davidson.
Hi, my name is Sue Taylor-Davidson, and I'm the author of 2 books of the series To Pluck a Crow. The second book was published by Renaissance Press last June, and it's called Death Stalks the House of Herbert, Book 2. The cover illustration by Nathan Frechette. Thank you. I'm reading from page 84. Just to put it into context, I believe that Mary Sidney Herbert, a very real character in Elizabethan England, sister of Sir Philip Sidney, the poet, and courtier, I believe she may have written, along with her brother, some of the works attributed to Shakespeare. So I'll read to you from this chapter is where Mary is talking to her brother Philip's best friend, Fulk Greville, about a year after her brother's death. She had suffered a depression and has come out of it when she started her writing again. No, I am determined to speak through my writing, whether it be to my queen or to society in general. Philip's death is such a tremendous loss to our nation and to the Protestant faith that I believe God himself will show me a way to continue my brother's work, his passions, his causes. The rewriting of the Psalms in the best English dialect our country has seen is only a beginning. I intend to use his memoirs and notes to produce prose and plays, just as he and I did before, but which now will convey my brother's message and his spirit. But how will you, Fulk began. Do not tell me I cannot do this, because I am a woman. I will find a way, and when I do, there will be no stopping me. I will become a force to be reckoned with, should Elizabeth or any other person try to put me in my place. Continuing my brother's passion in the world is my new vocation. Through me, Philip will live again. Through my words, his voice will be heard again. I have spent too much time on my own loss. The mourning must end. It is time to act. She stopped and shook her walking stick in the air. Folk stood staring at her in shocked admiration. She had never appeared so determined. He remembered how Philip would often say of his sister, whom he loved so much, "Though she be but little, she is fierce." Thank you.
The Stealth Lovers by Cait Gordon.
Hi, I'm Cait Gordon, author of The Stealth Lovers. This is a military space opera romance novel starring formidable, legendary, and fabulous warriors Zaxel Knightley and Vivix Teroan. And I'm going to be reading from Chapter 3, A New Friend. Dear Father, I've made a new friend. You might know his father, Lieutenant Colonel Zacchaeus Knightley. I thought you mentioned the Lieutenant Colonel's promotion last year and said you'd been impressed with his career. I share the same barracks with his son, Zaxel Knightley. We seem to get along quite well. Crap or get off the pot, Zexter. Holy stars, can you even throw? Viv snickered as he lay on his bunk typing. The noise and chatter emanating from the open window gave a good indication that the round ball game had begun. Zax most probably wanted to play a position that Private Zexter had claimed first. Viv realized too late it might have been better to have explained to Zax that perhaps one shouldn't heckle members of one's own team. He's not like anyone I've met before. Built like a cargo vessel and stronger than several of us put together. I also believe our sergeant might be a bit fascinated by him. I don't think I've encountered a single soul who's so fearless. My sister is 4, and I bet she could pitch you across the plate, Zex. What? No, you shut it. The best you could ever throw is up, as in vomit. Oh, you want to make something out of it? Yeah, you better run, rubber arms. He might be a tad temperamental at times, but he has a good heart. On their first weekend pass, Viv had gone with Zax, Jorith, and 2 other recruits to explore what passed for a downtown near the base. While they were deciding on a watering hole where they could grab a drink and some lunch, one of the recruits spotted a woman sitting on a circular bench breastfeeding her baby. Oh, look at that, boys. I'd give anything to be that kid, said Kovacs, leering. No kidding, said Michaels. Hey, sweetheart, got anything left for a couple of hungry soldiers? The woman looked up, startled, and clutched her infant protectively. But before she could plan her escape, the 2 men who jeered at her fell unconsciously to the ground after having their skulls slammed together by a brute force. Or maybe just by a brute. Honestly, there are zygotes with better social graces than these anal cavities, cried Zax, heading over to the woman at the bench. She appeared terrified at first, after witnessing his violent response, but relaxed slightly as he removed his cap, bowed, and remained in a submissive pose. My dear lady, I apologize for the douchebaggery of my comrades. They're, well, bottom feeders, really. I'll personally guarantee they learn some manners. She regarded him cautiously. Zax turned his attention to the child, who'd just unlatched and peeped up at the strange new person who was not her mama. Private Knightley gasped. "Oh, who is this bitty little soul? Aren't you a precious thing?" The baby smiled. "Yes, you are. Oh, yes, you are," cooed Zax. "You're the most preciousest little warrior princess in the whole wide ever. I bet you could take down 70 Cragillions with just one flick of your teensy finger. Isn't that right, you tough thing?" A gurgly giggle this time. The mother allowed herself a small grin. "You're the sweetiest, weediest, fiercest, ferocious thing on Draggle, yes you are. Show me how you snarl, my young warrior." He led with a mock snarl of his own. "Grr!" growled the baby. Zax pretended to yelp in fear and fell down. "Eek! Somebody save me from this fearsome soul! Help! Help!" The mother outright laughed now. The baby was in hysterics and clapped her hands. "Grr!" she said again. Zax cowered and then collapsed on the ground as if all the bones had suddenly left his limbs. "You're very good," whispered the mother. "Have you done many productions?" Zax opened an eye. "Only this one thing called life." "I'm Aetha. This is Grania." He sat up and got to his feet, then bowed again. "Private Zaxel Knightley. Lovely to meet you both." "Would you like to hold her, Private?" He gasped again. "Just for a minute, and I promise to give her back. I think." Aetha smiled. "I'm not that worried, as I see she can take you down with 2 growls." Zax chortled. "You're not wrong. Come to me, my little bitty one." He tenderly held the child in his strong arms. Grania rubbed the front of her muzzle against his and said, "Boop, boop," he repeated. He played with the child for far longer than a minute, issuing gurgly noises of his own and pretending to understand all of her baby sounds. She snarled at him a few times, and he always pretended to be overwhelmed by her power. His new favorite thing was making this infant laugh. Zax tried every ridiculous expression he could think of to provoke her adorable giggles. Finally, Aetha said, "I'm so sorry, Private Knightley, but we're due to meet my husband at the clinic. It's her checkup, and we're all going together since he has leave this weekend. Ah, of course. Here you go. Zax tried to hand Grania back to her mother, but the baby didn't want to let go and clung to him with all her little might. Come on, Grania. Time to see Daddy, said her mother. The baby growled in reply. Oops, I might have inspired this warrior a little too soon for her parents' liking, said Zax. Grania would not loosen her grip. Her extended claws dug deeply into the fabric of the private's uniform. Aetha sighed. She's very attached to you. Quite literally. You know, she doesn't take to everyone like this. You're going to be a wonderful father someday. Oh, I'm sorry. You might already be. I shouldn't have assumed. Nah, I'm still a kid myself, but I'd love to have a bunch of my own and name them after the days of the week. Zax knew who he wished the father to be, too, beside himself, and how impossible a dream it was. He turned his attention back to the baby. Grania, who wants to fly? Her little blue-green head peered up where it had been resolutely pressed against his chest. Wanna fly like wee? She tilted her face with curiosity and loosened her grip on his uniform. Zax lifted her in the air and twirled about, holding her safely, swishing about. It's Grania, top pilot of her class. She's so good at flying, she doesn't even need a ship. Whoosh! Shush, said Grania. And now, entering into the hangar of the mommy ship, Grania makes a perfect touchdown. He placed the child into Aetha's arms, who held on to her gratefully. Thank you, said Aetha. Say bye-bye, Grania. The baby looked like she wanted to cry. Give me a big growl, said Zax. Grania's eyes perked. Grrr! Eek! Screeched Zax, then waved goodbye to the mother and child. When he turned around to see if his fellow recruits were still there, he saw Michaels and Kovacs standing up and rubbing their aching heads. Jorith stared at Zax completely gobsmacked, and Viv smiled brightly. As he neared them, Private Tyrone shook his head with amusement. Now I know why you've such a broad trunk, said Viv, indicating Zax's torso. Why? You need it to keep in all that sap. Zax snarled for real. You're cute. He scowled and intended to march past Viv, but a hand grasped his arms. That was amazing, Zax. Honestly, said Private Tyrone. Zax's breath caught in his throat, and he quickly patted Viv's hand. All right, my dearest darlings, said Private Knightley. Who's for the drinking and the eating? Jorith and Viv cheered. The other two groaned, but were still up for it. Actually, he has an incredible heart, Father, and he's always looking out for me. Sometimes I feel discouraged and frustrated that I'm not living up to my potential, and it gets me down. But then he'll do something to remind me I'm not alone. If you'd like to read more, The Stealth Lovers is available from Renaissance Press. Cheers.
Black Wolf, The Binding of Loki by Una Verdandi.
Hi, I'm Una Verdandi. I'm an author with Renaissance Press, and I'm going to be reading from my first novel, Black Wolf, The Binding of Loki, which retells the Old Norse myths from the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda, with a few modern literary twists. I'm going to read a bit from a well-known myth in which Thor gets his hammer, Odin gets his spear, and Loki almost loses his head. With great pomp, Odin called for a feast to celebrate their treasures. Servants scattered, rushing back with ewers of wine and then with platters of food. The summer evening passed with much food and drink and boisterous conversation. But late in the night, the festivities were interrupted when Odin's wolves began to snap and howl. The sounds of merrymaking died down as everyone's attention was drawn to the doorway, where two sour-looking dwarves announced that they were searching for Loki. All eyes turned to Odin's youngest, whose own pale eyes grew wide. He looked as though he might try to flee until Thor wrapped a brawny arm around his shoulders. Odin invited the dwarves to explain their business with his son. Brock and Eitri took a few steps into the room, their eyes fixed on Loki, who squirmed uncomfortably in Thor's grasp. You have seen the treasures, Gullinbursti, Mjolnir, and Draupnir, have you not? Demanded Eitri. The Aesir admitted they had. And are they not every bit as fine as Skidbladnir, Gungnir, and the Golden Hair? Brock asked. The Aesir agreed they were. Then we have fairly won the wager we made with Loki Loivaerson. We have come to claim our payment, said Brock forcefully, drawing his sacks. The Aesir burst into cacophonous rancor, and Thor gripped his brother tight, prepared to protect him or punish him, whichever was warranted. Frigg screeched and grabbed Odin's arm, her eyes filling with hot tears. Odin lifted his wife's hands to his lips and then stepped between the dwarves and Loki. And what wager have you made with my foster son? He asked politely, his voice edged with danger. We wagered that if we made treasures as fine as those of the sons of Ivaldi, that we would take Loki's head. You have agreed our creations are equal to theirs. We will take our prize now. The Aesir erupted into mad shouts. Odin's one blue eye shot Loki a fiery glare. Thor gripped his brother so tight he nearly broke the boy's collarbone. You idiot, he hissed into Loki's ear, shaking him. Did you not think they would demand payment? A horrified silence fell over the room. All eyes were on Loki, who gulped air into his rigid body as he tried to think his way out of the death he had tricked himself into. His mind burned and his pulse thudded in his ears as the two dwarves approached. Outside intervention would create ill will between the Aesir and the dwarves, and no one, not even Odin, would be prepared to do that. Loki began to panic. The dwarves approached with cold, emotionless intent, their finely crafted blades in hand, until they were only a few steps from where Loki stood, restrained by Thor's arm. Wait! Loki yowled shrilly, throwing his hands in front of himself. The dwarves scowled at one another as they gripped their blades tightly, expecting another trick. Loki stammered on as his voice cracked with fear. I said you could have my head, but I never said you could harm my neck. You can't take my head without harming my neck. Brock and Eitri seethed, their ugly faces contorted in rage. They bared their teeth at Odin, furious at the indignities inflicted upon them after they had bargained in good faith. Grey Wanderer, your son has deceived us. We demand justice, Eitri screamed, raising his sacks and shaking it furiously. Odin looked at the raging dwarves thoughtfully and nodded tensely, acknowledging their concerns. Indeed, your creations are as magnificent as any I have seen. You most certainly deserve payment. The wise old man spoke softly, ambling over his youngest son with a warm smile on his lips and cold murder in his eye. He gestured for Thor to release his brother and then, with deceptive ease and grace, grabbed Loki hard by his neck at the base of the skull, making him flinch. Odin smiled bitterly at Loki, who, unable to turn his head, glanced apprehensively at his formidable foster father from the corner of his eye. My son is still but a boy, he spat, though Loki was fast approaching adulthood, and he has little understanding of contracts. This was but a poorly tendered contract, my friends. Surely you can propose a more acceptable compensation that my dear son will very gladly pay. Odin's lips split open in a terrifying grin which he directed towards Loki. squeezed Loki's neck hard enough to make him grimace and breathed hotly in his ear. No tricks here, boy. We rely on the dwarves and their skills, so we cannot afford to squander their goodwill. If you ever do this again, I will cut off your head and present it to them myself. Loki swallowed hard. Their rage muted by the opportunity to resolve their grievance. The dwarves spoke quietly to one another while the Aesir whispered and stared. After a few unsettling minutes, the dwarves turned back to Odin, and Eitri spoke calmly. We would like to stitch-close the lips of Loki Loivearfsson, so that he may learn to think before he speaks. Odin's booming, mirthful laughter filled the great hall. A most wise and just price, my friends. This shall be done. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed.
The Cipher by Matti McLean.
Chapter 9. By midday, the fields and farmland had turned into a beautiful rocky green forest. Thick, dense underbrush vegetation obscured the ground, and Penner wondered how anyone had been able to travel through the forest before the roads were built. The ground was uneven and smothered in plants bigger than any Penner had seen, some green, some brown, some red. Even from their height, he could make out the trees that seemed to be clawing at the sky. Their long branches would look terrifying from below, but even from above, they had a creepy quality that made him uneasy. Fred said that they were sailing at around 80 feet. From the glimpses Penner could manage over the side of the ship, he had no doubt. He couldn't comprehend being so high up, and when he caught a glimpse of the ground, it made him feel dizzy. That, with the near-constant nausea he'd felt since the ship had begun its ascent, was enough to incapacitate him. Currently, he was slumped in a chair beside Fred. She told him that it was only a temporary feeling and that within a day or two he'd be fine, but that was little consolation right now. He felt like death. He looked like it, too. Fred seemed satisfied with the course of the vessel and had pulled out a small easel and canvas and was currently painting the landscape.
When you spend as much time in the sky as me, you really learn to appreciate the view.
I'll have to take your word on it. How long have you been flying?
As long as I can remember.
She said, smearing some green over the canvas.
And how long has that been?
Long enough. I rescued Cassandra from a scrap heap. I like to think she rescued me. She was set to be torn up. Few people know how to steer a dragonfly vessel anymore, much less one of this size. Once I saw her, I knew that I couldn't just let her fall away and be used for scrap. So I left my old life and traded it in for the sky. Haven't looked back since.
She pulled her eyes away from the painting and smirked at Penner.
You know, you really shouldn't stay in one spot like that. The only way to get your body accustomed to the feeling is to move around. Come here.
I'm fine over here.
Consider it an order from your captain.
He looked up at her, intrigued, and was struck by how attractive and powerful she looked. Her smile was warm and inviting, and her eyes had a glamorous twinkle. He wanted to resist, but with a grunt, he pulled himself up from the chair and dragged himself across the deck. He felt his insides wobble like they were unattached. His legs were shaky, but he managed to slither over to her and took a glimpse of what she had been working on.
You're quite good,
he exclaimed, a little louder than he intended.
You sound shocked.
It just seems an odd hobby for an aviatrix.
It's one of the more honest ways to learn a living in the sky. I always keep around supplies in case inspiration hits. Some villages pay handsomely for fine art.
I trust it's not the only way to make a living in the sky.
Fred turned to him.
Is that an accusation?
It's nothing. Never mind.
I have a wide variety of jobs I do to keep my ship in the air. It's important to diversify. Keeps the brain fresh, always thinking. Always making new avenues for financial success. Ain't nothing wrong with doing many things to get back.
She picked up her brush once again and smiled at her creation.
Some options require a bit more finesse than painting, but all require great skill. With enough time and practice, they can all be mastered.
Are they all legal?
Legality is a formality for those tied to the earth. Morality doubly so. The sky has a looser law system. You're not chained to the rule of one country, so it's important to follow your own moral compass. Not that you and Chess have ever done anything outside legality before.
Well,
Penner felt himself flush and had to turn his gaze towards the sky.
I see through you, Penner, more than you realize. But at least the view is decent.
He coughed and fiddled with his pocket watch. He pulled it from his vest pocket, trying to see what time it was. He was so flustered he didn't even realize it wasn't working.
The watch won't work. You're in a different place now. The magnetism in the air is too strong.
Penner frowned and shut the watch, then took a couple steps back towards the cabin.
I'm going to see how he's doing.
You should give him some space. He needs that right now.
Your concern is noted, but...
He's sorting through his brain right now. It requires time and space. Give it to him.
Whatever is happening to Chess...
It's not madness.
It's not normal.
Who are you to say anything is normal? Something very unexplainable has happened, and he's just trying to sort it all out. Let him do that.
You act like you know him.
I've seen it before.
And?
Quiet. I need silence to capture this.
She held her brush up to the sky. She smeared more paint on the canvas, and Penner sat back down. For a few minutes, neither said anything, but Penner found his eyes growing heavy. Before they could continue their conversation, he had drifted off to sleep.
Distant Early Warning by Elizabeth Hirst.
Hi, this is Elizabeth Hirst, and today I will be reading from my eco-fiction survival horror, Distant Early Warning. Denny patted the tree like the shoulder of an old friend during a shared joke. She wasn't so sure she and the tree hadn't shared a joke anyway. The presence of the children had reminded Denny that it was rent collection day. The girls took turns collecting money from the squatters in the backyard, and this month it was Denny's turn. She made her way down the empty driveway to the gray garden gate and knocked. The latch was easy to pick from the other side, but Denny never intruded on the mandrake's scant privacy. At the back of the house she could smell multiple aromas that, because of the damp, stagnant air, had not been apparent at the front. The first was smoke and meat, corresponding with the plume of campfire smoke rising over the privacy fence. The second was laundry soap. Denny wondered where squatters had got real laundry soap, but she applauded the feat. And the third, much less pleasant to the nose, was baby diaper, sour and somehow powdery. Mrs. Mandrake answered the garden door. She was a thin woman, once genteel, with brassy blonde hair and sharp lines around her mouth. She wore a patched, stained button-down shirt that was probably a nice pink stripe once, and a picked brown flare skirt. In one arm, she carried a baby girl, and in the other, a knife. Her dour expression softened when she recognized Denny. "Oh, Denny, it's you," she said. "I thought it was Yasmin again to complain about the noise." Denny stepped into the front yard, the Mandrake's home for what it was worth. A long stretch of tarp and duct tape covered their living space, a complex of crate pieces nailed together and supported in place with broomsticks. Underneath, plastic Rubbermaid crates doubled as a storage space for all their worldly possessions and as a means of keeping their sleeping bags off the ground. Jason, their 7-year-old, poked at a glowing fire with a stick. A miserable place to live, but every available room in the house was full, including the living room couch, and most houses nowadays were the same. Hopefully the government would finish the relief camps soon, so people like the Mandrakes could at least have a state-issued tent to live in. Mrs. Mandrake had been a secretary, or so she said, for a lumber concern in Thunder Bay. Mr. Mandrake had run a landscaping business. Both of them had lost everything when the screamers rose. The dead had risen from the ground at night, and chased families from their homes, and screamed in a strange gibberish language that pierced the ears and warped the senses. People had gone mad in those first 3 months, unable to sleep and unable to rationalize what was happening to them. No one in Ontario had believed the refugees at first, because who, in the age of cell phones and the internet and all of the other trappings of modern-day life, would believe that the dead could actually rise? And yet, the North was rapidly emptying itself, And there were the testimonies, thousands upon thousands of them. Denny had believed the mandrakes, even before Foster Towers Media Corp had gone up north and gotten the first national broadcast out. As someone who read made-up stories all day, Denny could recognize a yarn, and Mrs. Mandrake told stories that no one could or would make up. For instance, there was Mr. Mandrake's old business partner, the stone wholesaler, who jumped into a river glen after one of the screamers turned out to be his brother. That one always gave Denny the chills. Ghosts, wraiths, zombies, those were outlandish things, but having one as part of the family, you'd never escape them or the memory of what they'd become for as long as you lived. And Dad was still missing. Denny shook off her macabre thoughts. People like the Mandrakes didn't need any more negativity flowing their way. "It's that time again, Mrs. M. It's my turn to collect the rent." Denny cringed for Mrs. Mandrake's inevitable arguments. The reasons, all true, that she didn't have this month's rent. The rising price of fresh food, little JJ growing out of his jeans, needing to go across town to the doctor on the bus. Denny prepared to argue and prepared to feel bad for the rest of the night. As much as the Mandrakes didn't have money, neither did she. She had covered for them before, to deflect Yasmin's wrath, but the money had come out of her savings. She'd had to borrow textbooks from a classmate one semester in order to make up the money, and that had been a close call for her grades. No grades, no education. No education, no ticket inland away from the flooding. Mrs. Mandrake set her knife down on a bloody piece of newspaper, where she had been cubing some beef. She wiped her hands off on her apron. "I've got your money for once. There's something else we need to take care of first, though." Jason left the fire. He had a lean, freckled face and wore jeans ripped at the knee. "I want to keep him! Let me keep him!" he said, dancing around his mother. Mrs. Mandrake stilled him with a firm hand on his shoulder. "We've got no money, JJ. The only way he stays is if he eats your meals." "Keep who?" Denny asked. The feeling in her stomach spread out and grew sour. Mrs. Mandrake did not answer. She led Denny along the board fence, painted an ugly, peeling brown. Jason trailed behind them, sulking. They crossed the yard, to where another alleyway extended down the house between the wall and a chain-link fence. This gap dead-ended at the front of the house and was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze down sideways. For as long as Denny had lived at the house, they had kept old clay pots and faded-out plastic lawn ornaments back there. Denny wasn't sure what they were storing them for. They probably came from previous owners, back in the time when only one family lived there. A section of white plastic garden trellis tipped upward, then fell over. From underneath crawled a black and white border collie, his shaggy fur tipped with mud. He held his tail down and kept his ears pulled back. Ratty blue collar. Bone-shaped license tag. Denny's stomach flipped over into full-scale nausea. "Jeff," she said, kneeling down and putting her arms out. "Come here, boy. Oh, it's okay." Jeff wagged his tail, remaining low to the ground. He crept toward Denny and flopped over onto her feet, the tip of his tail still wagging. His eyes were as large and glassy as shooting marbles. Denny scratched his head, ignoring the gross, dandery substance that collected on her fingers when she did so. Jeff stretched up toward her face and licked her chin. "This is my dad's dog. Jeff shouldn't be here without Dad," she said. "Someone kicked him out of a car onto our front lawn this morning, and we let him into the backyard. Ever since, he's been cowering in that pile of junk." "You never saw a man with him? A man with curly hair and an old bomber jacket?" Denny said, standing up. Jeff migrated over to her right hand, placing his head directly underneath it. Denny petted him absently, lost in a sea of half-formed, fearful thoughts. Mrs. Mandrake shook her head. "Denny, I've seen your father before. He wasn't here. I'm sorry." "Right," Denny said. She headed for the steps to the back porch and the square of cool darkness visible through the screen door. Jeff followed her, not leaving her magical right hand for a moment. Denny wondered how long it had been since someone had petted him. "Denny!" called Mrs. Mandrake as she squeezed the screen door handle. "What? I've still got rent for you." Denny pulled the door open. She let Jeff slip inside before her. "Could you put it in the mail slot? I have to make a few calls." She would also have to find a place to hide the dog.
Blood State by Raluca Balasa.
So this reading comes from chapter 17 of Blood State, my debut science fiction novel, but I do think it stands alone. The only context I think you will need, basically a character has been accused of terrorism when she in fact is not the culprit. So that's all I'm going to say about that, and I'm going to launch into the reading. This comes from Blood State. Erin kept track of the days by the hair growing on her body, the grease caking her roots and the filth on the soles of her feet. They didn't let her shower. Her food was nearly inedible, her drinking water cold enough to numb her lips. When the hibernation weight began shifting, then melting, she could only think that she wouldn't need it anyway. She would never make it to the Ice Age. General Devereux's men didn't interrogate her again, but she always felt them there, hanging in her periphery like spiders from their webs. Eventually, the lack of food caught up with her, and the ground didn't feel so cold anymore. But when she lay down to sleep, a gong sounded, loud enough to shake the walls. Erin retreated into the corner of her cell, shivering, until her tailbone grew numb. It felt like hours before she managed to close her eyes again. The gong. Soon Erin's eyes grew crusted with sleep. She paced, wept, shouted, wept again, but none of it mattered. The only response she got was, "Who hired you?" And she never knew what to say, because no one had. The gong sounded again. Hunger and thirst, even the cold, became a scabbed wound. She began sleeping through the noise, and then they opened her cell and hit her until she woke. "Who hired you?" Erin blinked. Two shadows swayed above her, merging into one. "I work alone," she managed. "Let that appease them." "Who hired you?" There'd been a dream. She'd been in school, and the instructors had been trying to assign her to a group, but she hadn't gotten along with the other children. She'd never gotten along with strangers, even among her own people, never been concerned for them. The disappearances were likely just teenagers run away from home, she had told herself, time and again. Then her father had gone missing. The shadow raised its arm. A voice at the back of her mind chimed a warning, but she felt too tired to recoil. Then another voice sounded, a real one. It seemed so soft after the echoes of that gong, and she couldn't retain its words. "I work." The hands released her. Cold stone enveloped her body, a welcome embrace. Shadows retreated from her cell. Alone. Her prickling arm woke her. She rolled onto her back, shivering in the chill. She'd fallen asleep facing the stone, a bad move for someone seeking to conserve heat. The insatiable ground had leached her warmth again. After what felt like an eternity, she heaved herself up. Every tendon in her body felt stretched beyond its limit, but the slippery wall beneath her palms offered some support. She couldn't see well in the dark, most Shelley didn't, so she blinked until her surroundings took shape. No lights had flicked on, which meant no one could be here. But she felt a presence, a humidity weighing the air. "Who's there?" she asked. Something echoed on the other side of the bars. Footsteps halted. "Am I disturbing you?" said a man's voice in the darkness. The one from before, not soft as she had imagined it, but deep and echoing. The voice from Rotoma Square, the one that had condemned her to imprisonment. Erin's heart pounded madly. It must have been the adrenaline that made her reply, "I'm actually quite busy at the moment." The general didn't skip a beat. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, the cold stone is very good for my back." "I prefer the cold myself," he said. "I've been down here for some time." "Slow day at work?" "On the contrary," he answered. "I'm in no hurry to return upstairs." "Oh, so he'd rather lurk in the dungeons than face the brave council?" Erin swallowed. Why did she imagine he could study her in this darkness, that this was all some sort of test? She breathed deeply. "I'd like to at least see you if we have to talk." "Of course," he answered. "Forgive me." Lights illuminated the corridor, so unexpectedly that Erin's eyes watered. She shielded them with her arm, peeking above it to see the general's tall, uniformed shape silhouetted before her. He stood straight as a pendulum, his hands behind his back. She didn't make herself look at his face against the glow. I apologize for the treatment you've received, he said. My men have my best interests at heart, and they've been trained in efficiency, but the method they chose was regrettably unprofessional. Unprofessional? Aaron could see where his wife had learned her terrible bedside manners, or perhaps it had been the other way around. Most modernists had this verbose way of speaking that made everything seem trivial. Unsuitable might be a better word, Devereux continued, stepping closer. You see, I have ample evidence to condemn you already, and enough power to do so without a trial. It isn't my intention to make you admit to being the terrorist. The general came into focus as Aaron's eyes adjusted to the light. Even without the podium he had used at the festival, the man stood a head and a half taller than her. The light contoured his face, making it look full of edges that cast intersecting shadows. Yet for all his stature, he seemed worn, a tapestry holding on by a single thread. She couldn't say why. Not a hair out of place, not a wrinkle on his jacket. Your soldiers were set on getting a confession from me, she growled. Now you don't want one? Not on its own, he said. I want a confession I can believe. Which meant he wasn't sold on the idea of her being the terrorist, not yet. And unless this was some mind game, which Aaron hadn't yet ruled out, it gave her something beside the cold and the darkness to latch onto.
The Reluctant Barbarian by John Haas.
Hi, thank you for coming and listening to me read. So today I am going to be reading from my first book, The Reluctant Barbarian, and I am going to be reading the first chapter of the book. So it's not going to give anything away, but it'll give enough of an idea of if you want to hear more of the book. So, yeah, let's get started. Arthur Jenkins was an oddity. At the precarious age of 40, standing at the summit between young and old, he was able to say he was content with life. Not quite happy. No, he wouldn't have used that word to describe himself. But content were. Content. When he breathed in and out, it was to the tune of that one word, content. His quiet, uneventful job and cozy one-bedroom apartment where he hid away on weekends, doing crossword puzzles and reading fantasy novels, helped in his contentedness. This was all he'd ever wanted. Best of all, most people just left him alone. He cherished the calm, predictable routine that was his day-to-day life. Of course, all that was about to change. He came to a halt, one foot inside his small, windowless office. What sat behind his desk was unmistakable. He hadn't seen an angel before, but the soft glowing halo and magnificent wings pressing against the low ceiling took away any doubt. Before anyone in the outer office had a chance to see what was inside his, Arthur had stepped inside and closed the door. While he was an excellent employee at Stewart & Son, he was not what would be termed as indispensable. Not at all the type who could have an angel visit during working hours, or even over lunch for that matter. The angel read from a thick, leather-bound tome hovering over the desk, not quite pressing down against the potted aloe plant his mother had given him at lunch yesterday. Arthur, who didn't like disturbing the spiders crawling across the walls of his apartment, leaned back against the doors, hands folded in front of him. A study of patience, he hoped. He waited long enough to wonder if perhaps this angel had in fact died here as some sort of joke. That set him to wondering if angels could in fact die, and why he would choose Arthur's desk as a place to do it anyway. If it was a joke, Arthur didn't get it. He itched to peek at his watch, but was afraid that, if the angel were not in fact dead, the action might appear impatient, rude even. Behind him, the door rattled under the impact of a sharp double knock. Arthur jumped and spun around, staring at the door. The noise came a second time. He opened it a crack to reveal the unsmiling face of Sidney Stewart, Jr., the son in Stewart & Son. "What are you doing, Artie?" Stewart demanded. I had to knock twice. Mr. Stewart, Jr. always called him Artie, like Arthur's mother did. It made him feel like a toddler. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir," Arthur said. "I was on the phone." Lying did not come easy to Arthur, breaking into a full-body sweat whenever he tried. He positioned himself in the crack of the doorway, wetness running down his back and sides while trying to appear casual. "What's going on in there?" Stewart's eyes narrowed, and he gave the door a shove. Stumbling back, Arthur watched in horror as his boss strolled into his more crowded by the moment office. Arthur spun toward the desk, hoping the angel had been a figment of his imagination, which would have been strange, given that he didn't have one. Still, he would have made an exception if it meant the angel being gone. It wasn't. "What do we have here, Artie?" "I can explain." "I doubt it." Arthur knew that was indeed true. How can one explain the presence of an angel in their office, even if that one did know the reason, which he did not? 20 years he'd worked at Stewart & Son, 15 years more than the Sun. He liked his job, too, enjoyed the world of processes and auditing, appreciated the logic and organization it required. A quiet job where he didn't have to interact with too many people. That was all over now, he knew. You couldn't have your boss barge in on an angel in your office and not expect repercussions. Stewart stormed across the room, frowning, and grabbed the aloe plant from under the angel's book. He stormed back again, stopping in front of Arthur. "No personal plants, Artie. They attract bugs." Arthur's mouth gaped open, closed, then opened again, making him look like a fish thrown onto the floor of a boat. I... Get rid of it, Artie." "Yes, sir. I'll take it home at the end of the day, if that's okay." "I suppose. But you owe me one." "Hey!" He snapped both fingers, sharp cracks that always made Arthur flinch. "I do need someone to work extra hours this weekend." Arthur nodded like a bobblehead, and Stewart grinned. "No overtime pay." Arthur shook his head. Fine. I guess I don't need to mention the plant to Dad, then." Tossing the offending plant to Arthur, his boss left without another word. Arthur followed him to the door, closing it when the other man reached a sufficient distance. "Why do you let him treat you like that?" Arthur jumped at the booming voice filling the room. What?" "Relax, Arthur," the angel sighed. "Have a seat." Arthur stumbled to the extra chair facing his desk, congratulating himself on his presence of mind to not drop where he was. Now that the angel had spoken, Arthur searched his mind for the proper etiquette, wondering if averting his eyes was correct. "Alfred, would you just look at me?" the angel said, exasperated. Arthur looked up from his study of the carpet. "Sorry, I'm not used to..." Also unsure of the correct terminology, he waved his hand in a way he hoped conveyed his unspoken point. "Would you have preferred to find a demon behind your desk instead?" Arthur shook his head, assuming that would be worse. "I shouldn't think so. They smell terrible." The angel laughed, the sound like a sonic boom, shaking the papers on Arthur's desk. "That was a joke, Arthur." Arthur forced a smile onto his face. "Ouch, that's terrible. You don't have much of a sense of humor, do you?" Arthur shook his head, the grimace fading. "Not a shame. Humor, imagination, and desire for adventure were the best traits you humans were given." Imagination hadn't shown up more than a few times in Arthur's life, and adventure was for characters in books as far as he was concerned. What he did have was an auditor's soul which liked everything in its place. Why couldn't Mr. Stewart see you?" The angel stared until Arthur became uncomfortable under the unblinking gaze. "Another dim one," the angel muttered, then said to Arthur, "He couldn't see me because I'm here for you." "Here for me?" "Yes." "You mean to take me..." Arthur pointed upward. The angel glanced at the ceiling, then laughed again. "Oh, no, nothing like that. Do I look like the angel of death?" Arthur was unsure what the angel of death would look like, but pictured the ghost of Christmas future. "Then why are you here?" The angel shrugged, knocking a ceiling tile loose. "I'm here to answer your prayer." "My prayer?" "Well, wish, really. Prayer, wish, same thing these days." "A wish?" Arthur's mind whirled through the usual options of money, fame, and power, all of which held no real interest for him. He enjoyed his life the way it was. For once, he wished he did have an imagination so he could think of a better wish. "How long do I have?" Arthur asked. "For what?" "To decide my wish." The angel squinted one eye and raised the opposite eyebrow. Arthur took that to mean confusion. You've already wished. Arthur managed to squint one eye, but raised both eyebrows, as he always did when he tried to raise one. He looked more surprised than confused. I don't understand, Arthur said, giving up on the facial expression. I don't remember making a wish. Oh, of course. I always forget. The angel rolled his eyes. Humans may have gotten the great imagination, but it's balanced with terrible memories, isn't it? The angel opened his book again, flipping from page to page with a slow, measured ease like he was absorbing every word of the latest bestseller. Arthur was sure it was all for effect. Here it is. Arthur Jenkins, age 9 years, 6 months, and 9 years old, Arthur almost shrieked, then calmed himself when he remembered who he'd been almost shrieking at. The angel didn't notice. After taking the longest, deepest breath in the history of calming breaths, Arthur continued without any noticeable shriek in his voice. You're here to grant a wish I made when I was 9? Yes. He tried to remember any wishes he'd made when he was a child, but nothing came to mind. What did I wish for? Yes, well, I was getting to that when you started almost shrieking, the angel muttered. Your wish was... Arthur fidgeted in his seat as the angel read the words to himself, then chuckled. To be a barbarian and live a life of adventure. What? This time Arthur did shriek. Well, specifically asked to be Conan, but you can call yourself whatever you like, I suppose. Arthur tried to sit, found he already was, and stood instead. A barbarian? Why would I wish to be a barbarian? And it all came back in a sudden blink of memory, and he groaned. 9 years old, and Mike had dragged him off to see that movie, the one his mother had forbidden in no uncertain terms. In her mind, barbarians were not the type of people her son should be learning about. She wasn't thrilled about Mike either, calling him the bad influence. But he was Arthur's only friend, so she endured it. Mike had been a bit of a bad influence, too, always convincing Arthur to do things he wasn't supposed to, like seeing forbidden movies. The movie had been amazing, though. It filled Arthur's boring soul with a sense of adventure and imagination. All the way home, he dreamed about living the life of a barbarian, an adventurer, a hero. Then disaster struck. The next-door neighbor had seen Arthur coming into the theater and mentioned it to his mother. When Arthur got home, he was greeted by a Class 4 hurricane that sent him to his room without dinner, telling him to think about what he'd done. By morning, his brief flirtation with adventure had become a vivid regret. But before that, he had wished for him and Mike to be barbarian heroes like Conan. The thought of his best friend brought a smile to Arthur's face. He missed Mike. Arthur, the angel said, pulling Arthur from his memories. But I don't want that wish anymore. The angel's wings sagged. Oh, not again. This has happened before? More times than I care to remember, ever since we started fulfilling wishes. Oh, when was that? Arthur hoped that if he showed interest, the angel would leave, a tactic he used with bullies back in high school. It hadn't worked then either. 10 years ago, by your concept of time, the angel leaned back in Arthur's chair, a difficult feat with wings. You see, for a long time we didn't grant wishes at all. We left that to the genies and leprechauns. The angel grinned, and Arthur nodded in what he hoped was a sagely manner. The angel stopped grinning and shook his head. Anyway, we debated for ages on whether wishes equaled prayers until it was finally decided we would reward the deserving. The wish itself had to be heartfelt, something coming from the depths of the wisher's soul. Now we're pushing those wishes through the system, trying to clear the backlog. Not to question the way things are done, Arthur said, but why didn't you just start granting wishes as people made them? The angel spread his arms, looking upward. Yes! If someone like this gets it, his focus returned to Arthur. Excellent idea. Exactly what I suggested, in fact. He sighed. No one listens to me. Arthur wondered if he'd gone insane, the alternative being that he was in his office talking to an angel about heaven's politics. One angel decided it wouldn't be fair to allow new wishes and not earlier ones. Another agreed. Next thing you know, that's official policy. Isn't that more difficult? Oh, yes. But at least we managed to agree that dead people shouldn't have their wishes granted. Imagine someone who'd been dead for years getting their wish for immortality. Right. Arthur agreed, still not comprehending in the least. Well, I guess you have a lot of wishes to take care of, he added, hoping the angel would take the hint and be on his way. Oh, more than you can know. The angel settled back into the chair. Now that we've started catching up to the present, most angels have been reassigned, and those that are left have a daily quota. It's very stressful. Well, I'm sorry that I didn't want my wish, Arthur said, hoping again that these would be the right words to end this bizarre encounter. That's okay, the angel said, getting to his feet, his wings spread to fill the area behind the desk. Are you ready, then? Ready for what? Your wish, of course. But, yes, I know. You don't want your wish, and as I said, that's okay. You don't have to want it. You can't just grant a wish I don't want. A storm brewed in the angel's eyes. Yes, I can. But I like my life the way it is. It is unfortunate, the angel raised his hands like a magician ready to cast a spell. Arthur's world swam out of focus. Stop, Arthur said. The angel dropped his arms, slapping them against his sides, and the world popped back to normal. Look, I know you don't want this, but there's nothing to be done. I have my quota. Arthur considered this. He could appreciate the process of auditing this angel must endure. Then he considered running. Believe me, Arthur, you're not the first to go through those. There are others like me? Like you. Oh, worse, much worse. One woman who was extremely unpopular as a child wished that every boy in her class would fall in love with her. Oh, that's not too bad. Except she made the wish when she was 10. Okay. Then grew up to be a teacher. Ah, the angel coughed. And a nun. Oh, yes, oh. Now we have 10-year-old boys dreaming lustily about her, and all of them sure they're headed for hell for it. The woman herself is terrified of being alone with her students. Maybe you shouldn't grant any more childhood wishes, Arthur said. Good idea. I'll suggest that when I return. Then under his breath, no, listen, though, no one ever listens. Wait, Arthur said, an idea coming to him. I won't tell anyone if you don't give me the wish. Oh, no. No. I won't fall for that one again. You think they don't see? Arthur sagged in defeat. If you don't want the wish, just imagine what Mike's reaction will be. What do you mean? Your wish was for you and Mike to be barbarian heroes. He'll have to join you. Arthur frowned. But Mike is dead. Yep, he will be pissed. The angel paused. Unless he's in hell, I suppose. Arthur considered his friend and thought the chance was about 50-50, remembering why Mike had been on the brink of expulsion during their last year of high school, and the year he'd spent wearing an ankle bracelet under house arrest. Are you ready to go? The angel asked. Go? Oh, don't start that again. You know the circumstances now. But where am I going? Someplace you can be a barbarian hero. You didn't think you could do that here, did you? The angel let out another booming guffaw that would have shaken the windows, if there'd been any. Arthur Jenkins, barbarian process auditor. Well, how do I get my current life back? The angel said, one finger tapping his chin. You could wish for it. Will that work? About 10 years. Arthur closed his eyes, making the most heartfelt wish he could manage, hoping he did it in a way that would be heard. Ready? The angel asked. Not really. Close enough. This won't hurt, will it? Arthur asked, slapping sweaty hands over closed eyes. He waited for the angel to do whatever magic it was that angels did. Nothing happened. Nothing changed. Arthur dropped his hands, still afraid to open his eyes, reasoning that as long as they stayed closed and nothing was happening, it wasn't so bad. The thought of passing through life with eyes closed crossed his mind, but he dismissed it as impractical. With a groan, he opened them. Is something... Words stuck in his throat. Where his desk and office should have been stood a massive wall of rough stone. A mountain loomed overhead, disappearing into the clouds above, and filled his entire world from left to right, top to bottom. Next, he became aware of the hairy loincloth around his waist. It itched. His scrawny, pale chest rose from it like a fish in a bear's mouth. About time you open your friggin' eyes. Arthur knew that voice. so gruff and street-level like a mugger in an alley, but so welcome and familiar. "Mike!" He spun around toward his friend, ecstatic at the thought of a reunion. As he saw just what had spoken, he froze, smile disappearing. "My God! Yeah, ain't I a sight?" And that is the end of chapter 1 and a little bit into chapter 2. Hope you enjoyed it.